Mafia boss caught his maid teaching his blind daughter to fight, but the truth left him speechless. The house shook with the sound of his voice as he roared her name, the echo ricocheting through the marble halls like gunfire. The door slammed open, and he stood there, breathing hard, eyes blazing with disbelief and fury as he watched his blind daughter swinging her fists wildly while the maid guided her movements. He shouted again, louder this time, a mix of humiliation, betrayal, and pure rage cracking through every syllable as he demanded to know what in God's name he was seeing. Why his daughter was fighting like she was preparing for a war she couldn't even see, and why the maid he trusted with his entire household was the one teaching her. The maid froze, the girl stumbled, and the tension in the room felt like it was sharp enough to cut skin. His voice thundered again, shaking both of them to the core, because a mafia boss doesn't tolerate secrets, especially not inside his own house. Before the scene continues, tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your city right now. Make sure you subscribe for more mind-blowing stories like this, because what happens next will change everything you thought you knew. Stay locked in, this is only getting started. He took one step into the training room, and everything in him was fighting the urge to explode. His daughter stood trembling in the middle of the padded floor, fists still half raised, her breathing sharp and uneven as if she'd been pushed to her limits. The maid, Mara, kept her head low, but he could see her chest rising and falling quickly like someone caught doing something forbidden but refusing to show fear. His heart hammered violently, not just with anger, but with something he hadn't felt in years: confusion. He wasn't supposed to feel confused. He was supposed to always know what was happening, especially in his own home. He was a man whose life depended on control, whose entire empire was built on the fact that no one ever dared to do anything behind his back. But here, right in the center of his mansion, two of the people under his protection had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. His daughter reached for the air, her hands searching for something that wasn't there, and for a moment, the fury inside him tangled with something unexpected. Vulnerability. He hated it. He crushed it. But it surfaced anyway because she looked lost, scared, and fragile in a way he tried so hard to protect her from. Mara stepped closer to her cautiously, ready to help guide her back toward balance. And that small gesture reignited the blaze in his chest. He stormed across the room, grabbed Mara by the arm, and pulled her away with a force that shocked even himself. The girl stumbled forward, calling out into the empty space, and he froze again because her voice cracked in a way that stabbed him right between the ribs. She wasn't calling for him. She was calling for Mara. His breath turned colder. The last thing he expected was to hear loyalty in his daughter's voice, but not directed toward him. Mara steadied herself and took a slow breath, refusing to look intimidated. It irritated him and fascinated him at the same time. Most people cowered when he was in this state. Mara didn't. She lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, but with the quiet strength of someone who believed wholeheartedly she wasn't doing anything wrong. That alone fueled his rage. He didn't need permission to feel betrayed. He didn't need understanding. He needed answers. Now, he demanded again, voice trembling with a mixture of fury and the weight of unspoken fear, what exactly she thought she was doing teaching his blind daughter how to fight like a trained soldier. Mara didn't respond immediately. She glanced at the girl, then back at him. The silence boiled his blood. He hated silence when questions demanded answers. The air grew charged, and for a moment, he wondered if Mara truly understood the danger she was standing in. He'd burned down entire organizations for less than this. He'd ended lives for smaller betrayals. And yet she looked at him with eyes that carried something different, something almost painful to interpret. Fearlessly measured, almost pleading, almost daring. The girl shuffled toward them again, hands outstretched, desperately searching for the familiar touch that had guided her through the last half hour. He watched her small fingers claw at the air, and something twisted inside him so violently that he almost stepped forward out of instinct. He stopped himself before he moved. But Mara didn't hesitate. She gently took the girl's hands and helped her find her footing again. And it was that simple, human movement that made him realize something was very, very wrong. His daughter leaned into Mara's presence like she depended on it, like she trusted Mara more than she trusted her own father. He swallowed hard, his jaw tightening as he processed this unsettling truth. It was a knife to the chest, and it cut deeper than he would ever admit. His empire feared him. His enemies respected him. His men would die for him. But here in this room, his blind daughter, his only child, chose someone else for protection, for comfort, for strength. He forced his voice into something quieter, something sharper, something that demanded truth without the thunder. His question came again, low but lethal. Why was Mara teaching his blind daughter how to fight? Why was she training her like someone preparing for danger? What danger? What did Mara know that he didn't? Mara took a slow breath and finally answered, her voice steady even though she must have known what was at stake. She told him his daughter needed more than safety. She needed independence, confidence, the ability to defend herself in a world that wasn't designed for her. She said the girl asked her for it. She said she couldn't refuse. Her words slapped him harder than any enemy ever had. His daughter? Asking for this? His chest tightened, so suddenly it felt like his heart clenched in a fist. He turned to look at the girl, really look, and for the first time he noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she held her jaw tight to hide the fact that she was terrified. Not of him, not of Mara, of the world, of being helpless, of being a burden. The realization shook him like a bullet to the spine. He had spent years building walls around her, thinking he was protecting her. But all he had done was cage her, trap her, blind her twice, once physically, once emotionally. And now she was reaching for something he never gave her: strength, independence, the ability to stand without leaning on anyone, even him. He hated how much that hurt. But beneath the pain was something even more dangerous: realization. He had been wrong. He had been blind. He had failed her in ways he didn't know how to fix. He stepped back, pacing his anger and shame warred inside him. Mara watched him carefully, ready for any reaction. His daughter stood quietly, hands gripping the air, sensing every shift in the atmosphere like it was written in the wind. The weight of responsibility crushed down on him as he considered the truth he had avoided for years. His enemies had tripled. His world was darker and more ruthless than it had ever been. The threats he faced weren't diminishing, they were multiplying. And in that world, his daughter couldn't stay protected forever. His chest rose and fell harder, his breath unsteady. Suddenly, the room felt too small. Suddenly, he felt like he wasn't the one in control anymore. But he wasn't a man who backed down from truth, no matter how painful it was. He crouched near his daughter, letting his voice soften in the way he rarely allowed. He asked her why she didn't tell him she wanted this. Her lips quivered, and she spoke in a trembling whisper that shattered him completely. She said she didn't want him to think she was weak. He felt something break inside him. He had done that to her. He had made her believe strength was something she didn't have. He stood up abruptly, fists clenched at his sides. Mara took a small step back, prepared for the worst. But instead of lashing out, instead of punishing, instead of ending her employment and her life in the same breath, he did something no one expected. He exhaled, slow, painful, conflicted, and he made the most unexpected decision of his life. He told Mara to continue. His voice was rough, reluctant, heavy with emotion he couldn't hide, but he said it anyway, because he finally understood. If his daughter wanted strength, she would have it. If she wanted confidence, she would gain it. If she wanted to fight, then she would learn from the best. Not just a maid, but a woman who clearly cared for her more than he ever realized. Mara blinked, shock flooding her eyes. His daughter's face lit up with a fragile, trembling relief that nearly brought him to his knees. But this wasn't peace. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't softness. This was the beginning. Because if someone had driven his daughter to desire this kind of strength, then someone out there was coming for her. And he needed to know who. He needed to know why. And he needed to get to them first, before they ever had the chance to touch her. He didn't move at first. He just stood there in the center of the room, feeling the weight of a decision he never imagined himself making. Allowing someone else to teach his daughter how to fight felt like handing over a piece of his power, like cracking open the armor he'd spent his whole life welding shut. But the way she held on to Mara's hands, the way her fragile hope trembled in the air like something too delicate to touch, it forced him to swallow the pride that had strangled him for years. Mara guided the girl back into her stance, hesitant at first, waiting for him to snap, to change his mind, to explode into one of the storms that made grown men tremble. But he just nodded stiffly, and that single gesture sucked the air from the room. His daughter lifted her chin with a confidence he had never seen before. Her feet shuffled across the mat, slow but deliberate, and he watched the transformation with a mixture of awe and dread. She wasn't supposed to need this. She wasn't supposed to want this. He had built an empire to shield her, not realizing he'd been suffocating her with it. Mara positioned her hands behind the girl's elbows, helping her turn her body, guiding the direction of her strikes. Every movement held a story. Every correction carried meaning. He felt like a stranger watching his own child discover a world that existed without him. Her fist shot forward clumsily, barely making a sound, but something inside him jolted at the sight. It wasn't the weak punch that shook him. It was the fire behind it, the determination, the silent scream of "I won't be useless anymore." Mara adjusted the girl's shoulders again, whispering something he couldn't hear, and suddenly the girl's fist moved faster, cleaner. He inhaled sharply. That wasn't an accident. That was focus, hunger, strength, things she'd been hiding from him. He didn't understand how he missed it, how he failed to see the frustration buried behind her smiles, the desperation masked behind her quietness. He always thought her silence meant contentment. Now he realized it had been a prison. He watched as she attempted another punch, her breath sharp, her brow furrowed, and something inside him twisted so violently it almost knocked him backward. She was trying, fighting, pushing against a world she couldn't see and a fate she refused to accept. And Mara, damn Mara, was the reason. The woman moved around his daughter like she had memorized every inch of her. The way the girl hesitated when turning left, the slight lean she did when sensing sound, the tiny tremble in her fingers right before throwing a punch. Mara guided her without overstepping, corrected her without breaking her spirit, encouraged her without feeding her ego. She knew her, not in the way an employee knows a child, in the way someone truly pays attention. He hated how much that rattled him. He didn't hire Mara to shape his daughter. He hired her to keep the house running. But somewhere between mopping floors and folding clothes, she had become something else entirely. A guardian, a confidant, a foundation. His daughter leaned on her emotionally in a way he had never been able to provide. He felt threatened by that truth, but he also felt stupid for being surprised. People didn't run to him for softness. They ran from him for safety. And she needed softness more than anything. He stepped forward slowly, hands behind his back, trying not to show the storm swirling inside him. Mara's gaze flicked toward him, cautious but steady. His daughter didn't even hear him approach, too focused on positioning her arms correctly. He could see the strain building in her muscles, the confusion when something didn't feel right, the frustration when she missed the angle, but she didn't give up. Not once. She kept trying again and again, even when sweat began to bead at her temple. He felt his chest tighten. He had underestimated her. She wasn't fragile. She was fierce. He let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding as Mara placed a hand over the girl's fist and slowly helped her correct the punch one more time. The movement was gentle, patient, something he could never replicate. When the girl struck forward again, the sound cracked through the room like a spark igniting something large and uncontrollable inside him. Pride, terror, love, all tangled like barbed wire inside his ribs. But the moment snapped when the girl suddenly turned her face toward him. Not her eyes, since they couldn't see him, but her whole expression shifted as if she sensed his presence. She asked him quietly if she was doing it right. The question pierced him. His voice caught in his throat for a second before he responded with a rough, low confirmation. Her smile broke him. It was small, shaky, barely there, but it was the most powerful thing he'd seen in years. And then the realization hit him like a sledgehammer. Someone had told her she needed to defend herself. Someone had made her feel unsafe. Someone had planted the seed of fear inside her heart. And it wasn't Mara. He took a slow step back from the mat, mind racing like a storm with no direction. His daughter had lived her entire life with danger hovering like a shadow, but she was never the target. He made sure of that. He kept her hidden from his enemies, protected behind layers of security no outsider could break through. But something had changed. Something had shifted. Something had slipped past him unnoticed. He felt the familiar burn of anger tighten his throat. He demanded to know why she wanted to learn how to fight. The girl froze mid-breath, her whole body going stiff. Mara shifted uncomfortably beside her, suddenly alert. The silence stretched too long, too heavy, too dangerous. He repeated the question, sharper this time, not out of cruelty, but fear. Fear of the answer. His daughter hesitated, then spoke so quietly that even the air seemed to hold its breath just to hear her. Someone grabbed her last week. Not in the house, not near the guards, but while she was at the back garden, walking along the path she always used to feel the sunlight on her face. She didn't tell anyone because she didn't want to make trouble, didn't want to cause chaos, didn't want to feel like a burden. She just remembered a rough hand clamping over her mouth, a cold voice whispering something she didn't understand, and then she was shoved away before the guards came running. The room went cold. His blood roared like fire through his veins. Everything inside him snapped. He knew exactly what that meant. Someone had breached his perimeter. Someone had gotten close enough to touch his daughter. Someone had sent a message, a warning, a threat. His world, the violent kingdom he built with merciless precision, had finally reached the one place he swore it never would, his home. His jaw clenched so hard he tasted blood. Mara placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder instinctively, and he didn't even have the strength to resent it. His daughter leaned toward Mara again, trembling, and it struck him. She wasn't scared of him. She was scared of whoever came near her that day. He breathed deeply, every inhale steeped in rage, every exhale soaking in regret. He asked why she didn't tell him sooner, but she only shook her head, her voice trembling as she said she didn't want him going to war again. She was tired of losing people. She didn't want to be the reason blood spilled in the streets. She didn't want to be the reason he killed. His chest cracked open. She thought asking for help would destroy the world. He wanted to tear someone limb from limb for making her feel that way. He turned away from them abruptly, pacing like a caged animal, fury clawing through him with every step. His enemies were bold, reckless, stupid enough to touch the only thing that mattered to him. They thought he was slipping, getting soft, losing edge. But this wasn't weakness. This wasn't softness. This was the beginning of hell for anyone involved. He pressed both palms to the wall, fighting the urge to break something, tear something, destroy everything. Mara's voice drifted across the room carefully, offering him information in a tone that suggested she'd been holding it for far longer than she wanted to. She admitted she saw bruises on the girl's arm that didn't add up. She noticed how jumpy she had become. She sensed something was wrong, and she said that if the girl wouldn't speak to him, she would at least make sure she wasn't defenseless. He closed his eyes. That wasn't betrayal. That was loyalty, not to him, but to his daughter. He turned slowly, controlled, but trembling with a lethal kind of stillness. He walked toward them, each step deliberate, heavy, filled with a promise he didn't voice but felt in every bone. He placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, steady and fierce, and told her without saying it that no one would ever touch her again. Mara's gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, they understood each other. This wasn't just training anymore. This was preparation. This was survival. This was war, and it was already at his doorstep. He straightened, his mind shifting into a place he hadn't gone in years, a darker part of himself he buried for her sake. The part that built empires with blood. The part that burned rival families to ash. The part that didn't negotiate. Someone had threatened his daughter. Someone had crossed a line. Someone was going to pay. And he would tear the city apart brick by brick until he found a hand that dared to touch her. The fire had started. Now he was ready to burn the world. He didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. His mind was too loud, too violent, too electrified with the knowledge that someone had already made contact with his daughter. Every time he closed his eyes, he imagined that rough hand over her mouth, imagined her tiny frame twisting in panic, imagined how close he came to losing her without even knowing it. He sat in the dark office with only the hum of his own heartbeat punching through the silence. Fists clenched so tight his knuckles cracked. He wasn't thinking strategy anymore. This was personal. This was primal. This was pure fire. His daughter was asleep upstairs, safe for now, wrapped in blankets she trusted, guarded by men who suddenly didn't feel good enough. Mara checked on her twice, moving like a ghost through the hallway, as if she was more worried about waking him than waking the girl. He watched her from the shadows once, saw the way she tucked the blanket under the girl's chin, the gentle way she brushed stray hair off her face, her expression soft in a way he didn't know she had. It did something to him, something uncomfortable, something he didn't want to feel but couldn't push away. She cared, deeply, more than most people in his world ever cared about anything. When she closed the door and walked toward the stairs, he stepped out of the darkness, making her freeze instantly. She didn't expect him there. Her breath hitched, but she didn't back away. He approached her slowly, almost like a predator trying not to spook prey, except she didn't move like prey. She stood straight, shoulders squared, gaze steady even though she knew he was 2 seconds away from unleashing a storm. He asked her again for every detail, not because he didn't believe her earlier, but because the anger pulsing through his veins demanded clarity, demanded fuel, demanded something to tear apart. Mara told him everything she noticed, the shift in the girl's behavior, the hesitation in her steps, the way she flinched when someone touched her unexpectedly. All the signs he missed because he spent too much time being a king and not enough time being a father. He swallowed hard, the shame prickling beneath the rage like salt in an open wound. Mara didn't say it to blame him, but the truth hit with the force of a gunshot. He had been blind too. He dismissed her finally, voice dropping into something dangerously soft. She nodded and walked away, but he saw the hesitation in her steps, the heaviness in her shoulders. She was scared, not of him, but of what might come next. She knew, probably better than anyone, that a Mafia boss reacting to a threat against his child wasn't going to be reasonable. He was going to be lethal. He pressed his palms flat against the desk, the wood creaking under the pressure. His eyes burned with sleepless fury. He had to move. Now, he called his men without saying a word, and within minutes, the entire security detail was inside the office, standing rigid as he stalked back and forth like a beast trapped in a cage too small. They waited for orders, but he stayed silent for a moment longer, letting the weight of what happened settle like ash around them. Then he told them everything, what happened in the garden, the hand over his daughter's mouth, the whisper, the shove. The room shifted instantly. The air tightened. Every man in there lowered his head, shame and fear mixing across their expressions. They failed him. He failed her. He ordered a shift in patrol routes, doubled security around the property, forced the night team to switch with the day team, so no one remained comfortable. He demanded cameras be rechecked, logs re-examined, footprints analyzed, gates inspected. Every detail mattered now. Every second mattered. He wanted the name of the man who touched his daughter. He wanted his family history, his address, his favorite food, everything. And when he found him, he'd show him what real fear felt like. His men scattered instantly, leaving him alone with thoughts that shredded his sanity. He walked to the window overlooking the garden where it happened, the exact place a stranger had tried to steal his daughter's safety. His fingers dug into the edge of the window frame, cracking the paint under his grip. He cursed himself under his breath, not even recognizing his own voice. He had enemies everywhere, rivals who'd kill for a fraction of his power, families who wanted him dead, organizations that watched his every move. But he never thought they'd go after her. He turned away from the window sharply, unable to look at the garden any longer. His pulse hammered in his ears. He needed to check on her. He needed to hear her breathing, feel the rise and fall of her chest, even if he had to stand at her doorway, like a shadow the whole night. When he stepped into her room, the air shifted instantly. It was quiet, soft, warm. Everything his world wasn't. His daughter was curled on her side, her small hands resting near her face, her expression peaceful in a way she never was when awake. Her vulnerability, the innocence she carried despite the chaos around her, only fueled his rage further. He sat by her bed slowly, careful not to make a sound. He reached out a hand, hesitated, then gently touched her arm. She stirred, mumbling something unintelligible, and then settled again. He felt his throat tighten, a rare sting behind his eyes. He hated emotion, hated weakness. But right now, holding her hand felt like the only thing keeping him from collapsing under the weight of his own fear. He stayed there for an hour, maybe two, maybe more. Time blended into nothingness. The only sound in the room was her breathing and the faint crackle of tension still simmering under his skin. Finally, he stood and walked out, closing the door silently. Mara was in the hallway again, like she'd been waiting. She didn't speak. Neither did he. They just looked at each other, the unspoken truth heavy between them. They both cared about the same girl, and they were both terrified for her. Morning came too quickly. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the last hours staring at files, analyzing patterns, calling informants who owed him favors or feared his disappointment. No one wanted to be on the wrong side of him today. Not when his anger was a living thing, breathing through every command he gave. By the time the sun rose, he had a lead. Not a name, not a face, but a group. A faction he thought he buried years ago. A family that once challenged him and lost so brutally he assumed the survivors scattered like insects. Apparently, they didn't scatter far enough. Apparently, someone wanted revenge. Apparently, someone was stupid enough to think hurting his daughter was the way to get to him. He cracked his knuckles one by one, each pop echoing with the promise of violence. He was going to resurrect hell for them. But before he could storm out the door and unleash chaos on the city, he heard something behind him. Soft footsteps, lightweight, a presence he recognized instantly. His daughter. She stood in the doorway of his office, leaning one hand against the wall, her other arm stretched slightly outward as she searched for stability. Her hair was messy from sleep, her socks mismatched, her expression confused as she followed the sound of his breathing. She asked him quietly where he went last night. She said she felt the house vibrating. She said she heard men running. He froze. Every instinct he had screamed to lie, to keep her shielded, to protect her from the truth. But she wasn't the same child she was yesterday. She wasn't fragile. She wasn't blind to danger in the way he assumed. She was already learning to fight, already stepping into a world she didn't see, but somehow sensed better than everyone else. He walked toward her slowly, placing his hand under hers so she could feel where he was. Her fingers curled around his without hesitation, and the familiarity of her touch steadied something inside him. He told her he had work to do. She asked if it was because of her. The question nearly broke him. He cupped her face gently, feeling the contours of her cheeks, the small scar she got when she fell as a child, the softness of her skin. She asked if she caused trouble, if she made things worse, if she was the reason he never rested anymore. His jaw locked. No one, not even her, was allowed to think she was a burden. He told her with a trembling intensity that she was the reason he lived, not the reason he struggled. She reached up and placed her hand over his, and that tiny movement shattered him so completely he felt his chest cave. She whispered that she wanted to be strong, so he wouldn't have to fight forever. He pulled her into his chest, holding her tightly, one arm wrapped around her small frame like he was anchoring himself to her. Her head rested under his chin, her breathing soft against his neck. He closed his eyes, inhaling her warmth, forcing back the storm threatening to spill out of him. When she pulled away, she lifted her chin in the direction of the doorway and asked where Mara was. He said she was downstairs. She nodded gently, her fingers trailing across his palm before she let go. She wanted to keep training. Of course she did. She wasn't afraid anymore. She was preparing. As she stepped into the hallway, he followed her, watching how she walked, more confident, more assured, more determined than last night. She was changing right in front of him, step by step, breath by breath. And as he watched her reach the bottom of the stairs, her hand brushing the railing lightly, Mara emerged from the kitchen, eyes widening when she saw her. The girl reached out toward Mara instinctively, and Mara rushed to her side, guiding her carefully. He felt a spark of warmth fight through the fire inside him. They were a team, a strange one, but a powerful one. He turned away, rolling his shoulders, cracking his neck, preparing for what was coming. He had a target now. He had purpose now. He had rage sharpened into clarity. Someone tried to steal his daughter's safety. Now he would steal their entire world in return. The war was officially beginning. He didn't breathe as he stepped forward. He consumed the air, pulling it into his chest like fuel, every heartbeat pounding against the walls of a man who had nothing left to fear. His pulse wasn't racing. It was marching, a drumbeat of intent that made even the shadows recoil as he moved through them. The men in front of him didn't realize the line they'd crossed. They saw a father. They didn't see the storm tightening around them, ready to snap its jaws shut. He didn't shout. He didn't warn. He moved, fast enough that the first man only had time for a half-swallowed breath before his world went black. The second one froze, and that hesitation cost him, too. It was clean, efficient, terrifyingly quiet, the kind of violence that didn't spill, it carved. He knew this rhythm. He knew how to end threats with the precision of someone who once lived in the places where mercy went to die. But this wasn't old work. This was personal. That difference made him faster. A phone buzzed in the pocket of the last man, still conscious. The idiot reached for it, trembling fingers fumbling with the screen, eyes flicking upward with dawning horror as he realized the call was labeled only with a single initial. He didn't get to answer. The father crushed the phone in his palm until glass cracked and circuits sparked, tossing the remains aside as though even touching it was beneath him. The goon backed up, stuttering out a plea that didn't matter. Nothing mattered except one thing. Where is she? Where is she? Where is she? The question wasn't spoken. It was etched into the air, vibrating through the space between them until the man panicked and spilled everything he knew. A location, a name, a plan that was never meant to be overheard. Words pouring out like a confession at gunpoint, even though he wasn't holding a weapon. He didn't need one. He was the weapon. He walked away before the man even finished talking. He didn't need the rest. He had enough to follow the trail, enough to set the next step of hell on fire. His phone vibrated in his pocket again, but this time it was a familiar name on the screen, someone loyal, someone who had stood beside him when bullets were currency. He answered with a single sentence that sent a cold wave through the person on the other end. They touched my daughter. No elaboration. No details. The silence in response was loud, like the inhale before a building explodes. Then came the answer, whatever you need. He didn't thank him. There was no time for gratitude, only motion. He climbed into the car, gripping the steering wheel with knuckles white enough to glow. His jaw clenched so tight he could taste blood in the back of his throat. He drove like someone who had memorized every street, every shortcut, every blind corner. Every second wasted was another second she could be afraid, and he refused to let her sit in fear. Not his little girl. Not ever. Memories of her flashed. Not sentimental ones, but moments where she had looked up at him with trust so absolute it felt like a weight he could never afford to drop. Her hand in his. Her voice calling his name. The time she fell asleep on his chest after scraping her knee. Little things that didn't matter to the world, but meant everything to him. They fueled him more than anger ever could. He arrived at the location and didn't bother with subtlety. He kicked in the door so hard it bounced off the wall and nearly split the hinges. The men inside scrambled, shocked, reaching for weapons they weren't fast enough to aim. He didn't slow down. He didn't give them the luxury of adjusting. One after another they fell, his movements so fluid they almost looked rehearsed. No wasted energy. No hesitation. The sound of impact, the crack of knuckles against jaw, the thud of bodies hitting the floor, it all blended into a brutal symphony. He kept moving deeper into the building, following the faintest trace of fear in the air, the instinct that guided him even when logic blurred. He felt her presence like a thread tugging him forward. Every footstep echoed with a singular promise. He was coming. He would get to her. Anyone between them would break. He reached the back room and paused for the first time, but not from uncertainty. From calculation. There were 3 men inside. He could hear their breathing through the door, uneven and nervous. He pushed it open slowly, forcing their eyes to meet his. They froze. Something in his stare stripped them of the illusion of control. One of them finally spoke, a weak attempt to negotiate, but his voice cracked halfway through the sentence. The father didn't respond. He didn't need to, because behind them, bound but unharmed, was his daughter. She saw him. He saw her. The world snapped back into place. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear, but from relief so sharp it cut deeper than any blade. He stepped forward, and everything inside him softened and sharpened at once. Softened for her, sharpened for the monsters who thought they could use her as leverage. The men panicked when they realized he wasn't stopping. They raised their weapons in shaking hands. But he'd already crossed the distance before the first shot even fired. The chaos lasted seconds. When the room finally stilled, he knelt in front of her, forcing his hands to stop shaking as he untied her restraints. She clung to him the moment she was free, her fingers gripping the back of his shirt as if she feared he would disappear. He whispered her name, voice rough, breaking in ways he never let it break. She buried her face against him. Inhaling the scent she grew up trusting. It grounded her. It grounded him. He lifted her into his arms, holding her with the kind of strength that promised no one would ever touch her again. But even with her safe against his chest, fury still pulsed through him like venom. Someone orchestrated this. Someone signed off on taking his daughter. Someone believed they could hurt her and walk away breathing. His daughter whispered a name into his ear. Just one. A name he never expected. His blood turned colder than steel. Not them. Not that person. He walked out of the building with her in his arms, stepping over the bodies of the men who thought they understood fear. They didn't understand anything. They didn't know what fear was until tonight. The night he stopped being a man and became a verdict. The night he turned into the consequence everyone thought they'd never face. He set his daughter gently in the back seat of the car, tucking her in with a blanket he grabbed without thinking. She held his wrist, refusing to let go, but he gave her a look, the kind of look that told her she was safe now, that nothing bad could reach her. She finally nodded, though her fingers trembled as she released him. He stood outside the car for a moment, breathing in the night air, steadying himself. He didn't let her see his rage. He saved that for the one who deserved it. The name she whispered echoed in his head like a detonator waiting to go off. Someone close. Someone trusted. Someone who just made the worst mistake of their life. He got into the driver's seat, the engine rumbling beneath him like it sensed what was coming. He didn't glance back at the building. He didn't need to. His eyes were already fixed on the next target, the next betrayal to unravel. A pulse of adrenaline shot through him, so hard his grip tightened involuntarily. They touched his daughter. They would pay all of them. But this one would suffer. Because this wasn't just war anymore. This was personal on a level the world wasn't ready for. And he was done playing nice. He drove without seeing the road, vision narrowed to a single point, a single name, a single betrayal that burned hotter than anything he'd felt in years. Every streetlight flashed across his face like a warning siren, but nothing could slow the storm building inside him. His daughter's voice kept echoing, soft and shaky, the way she whispered that name into his ear like it hurt to say it. Someone who sat at his table. Someone who held his daughter when she was a baby. Someone who used to call him brother. He gripped the wheel so hard it creaked, the leather straining under his fists. His jaw locked, muscles tight enough to crack. He replayed every moment with that traitor. Every shared victory, every laugh, every late-night plan whispered over drinks, and each memory twisted into a knife. How long had the betrayal been brewing? How long had they been smiling while plotting to use his daughter like a piece in their game? A horn blared behind him. He didn't care. Another car swerved out his path. He didn't notice. The only thing he felt was heat, a rising furnace that turned his blood into fire. He was past anger, past fury. This was something cleaner, colder, sharper, vengeance with a heartbeat. He pulled up to an apartment complex that looked too quiet for the level of violence vibrating through his bones. The lights were off in every window except one on the third floor. The blinds were drawn tight, but he could see a shadow pacing inside, agitated, restless. Guilt had a shape, and he was staring right at it. He didn't take the stairs. He didn't take the elevator. He climbed the side railing like a man possessed, 2 steps at a time, 3 steps at a time, barely touching the metal. He reached the landing and didn't knock. He slammed his foot into the door, splintering it inward with one strike that echoed like a gunshot. The man inside spun around, eyes wide, jaw dropping, fear slicing across his face so fast it was almost comical. The traitor opened his mouth to speak, but the father moved first, grabbing him by the shirt and slamming him into the wall so hard a picture frame crashed to the ground. The breath left the man's lungs in a choked gasp. He tried to raise his hands defensively, but his arms shook too much to be threatening. He didn't want excuses. He didn't want apologies. He wanted truth. Why? Why her? Why now? Why betray the only family you had left? He didn't scream the questions. He pressed them into the traitor's chest with each breath, with each shove, with each look in his eyes. And the man broke. His voice cracked as he confessed the truth, spilling it in frantic pieces, words stumbling over each other as if racing to escape his lips before they cost him his life. It wasn't personal, he claimed. It was business, he insisted. He owed someone money, someone dangerous, someone who promised this was just leverage, nothing more. They wouldn't hurt her, he repeated. He swore it. Wrong answer. The father's fist collided with his face, snapping his head sideways, sending blood splattering across the wall. The man crumpled to his knees, clutching his jaw, whimpering like a child caught in a lie. He kept babbling excuses, but every word made the father see red. Trembling apologies, promises of ignorance, cowardly explanations about debt, and poor decisions. None of it mattered. He had touched the one thing you don't touch. Family. The father grabbed him by the collar again and dragged him across the room like dead weight, slamming him onto the table so hard the wood cracked. Papers scattered across the floor. Maps, phone logs, coded messages. Evidence of planning. Evidence of coordination. Evidence that this betrayal was deeper than a one-time mistake. He scanned the papers with grim efficiency. A symbol repeated across several pages caught his eye, a mark he hadn't seen in years. A mark belonging to someone who used to run with them before everything fell apart. Someone who disappeared into the dark and came back with scars and ambition bigger than loyalty. This wasn't about debt. This wasn't about leverage. This was about power. Old enemies wearing new masks. He turned back to the traitor, whose eyes darted to the exit like a trapped animal looking for escape. Survival instincts kicked in, but he was too slow. The father pinned him again, voice low, each word a blade scraping across bone. He asked one final question. Who else was involved? The traitor hesitated. Wrong move. The father's hand tightened around his throat, just enough to make the world blur around the edges, just enough to make the man realize he only had seconds to decide. And panic loosened his tongue. He named names. 3 of them. All familiar. All trusted once. All now targets. Each name was another explosion in the father's mind. He released him, letting the man collapse onto the floor, gasping and coughing. He wasn't done with him. Not yet, but there were bigger fires to put out. He walked through the apartment, rifling through drawers, cabinets, anything that could reveal more. He found a burner phone buzzing with incoming messages. He didn't check them. He crushed it with the same ease he crushed the one earlier. When he turned back, the traitor was trying to crawl toward the door. Pathetic. He stepped on a man's hand, pinning it to the floor with enough pressure to make him scream. Not enough to break it. Not yet. The father crouched down beside him, eyes steady, calm, terrifying. He told the traitor he wasn't going to kill him. Death was too simple. Instead, he was going to use him. A message needed to be delivered, and it needed to be delivered by the weakest link. Let them know he was coming. Let them know he wasn't hiding. Let them know the rules had changed. The man nodded frantically, tears mixing with blood on his face. He looked like someone who had already accepted misery as his new reality. Good. The father stood up and walked out of the apartment, letting the broken traitor scramble behind him, clutching his hand, stumbling down the hallway. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Fear was a leash tighter than any rope, and the man wouldn't dare run. Not anymore. Outside, the night hit him like a bucket of cold water. Not refreshing, shocking. The world looked too calm for what was happening inside him. Streetlights hummed. Cars passed by. Life kept moving as if his head had not been detonated tonight. He sat in the driver's seat for a moment, letting the adrenaline spike again, letting the fury settle into something focused and deadly. He had 3 new names, 3 new targets, 3 new graves to dig. He called one of his men, giving orders with clipped efficiency. He wanted eyes on every name mentioned. He wanted addresses, habits, schedules, secrets. He wanted their worlds mapped out so precisely that he could walk into their lives blindfolded and still take them apart piece by piece. His man asked one question, the same question everyone would ask soon. What's the plan? The father inhaled slowly, deep, controlled. Then he exhaled with a certainty that made even the air tense. Burn everything they ever touched. He hung up and started the engine, but before he pulled away, he checked the rearview mirror. The traitor was standing on the sidewalk, holding his crushed hand, shaking violently. Their eyes met through the glass, and the man flinched like he'd been struck. Good, because this wasn't vengeance anymore. This was purification. This was the beginning of a reckoning so large the city would feel it tremble. The war wasn't coming. It was already here. He didn't sleep. He couldn't. His mind was a battlefield. Every thought a weapon, every memory a fuse waiting to burn. The city outside his window felt too calm compared to the storm boiling in his blood. Dawn hadn't even broken when his men started calling in, one after another, each delivering new intel, new movements, new weaknesses. 3 names, 3 traitors, 3 pillars holding up the enemy's plan, until today. He moved like a man possessed, grabbing his jacket, his knife, the pistol he hadn't touched in months. His hands were steady, disturbingly steady, considering the fury swirling inside him. But there was clarity now, sharp and focused. Revenge wasn't enough. Justice wasn't enough. This was about sending a message so loud it carved itself into the bones of every man who dared touch his family. He stepped outside, the cold air slicing across his face like a warning he ignored. A car waited for him at the curb, engine running. His most loyal soldier sat behind the wheel, eyes forward, heartbeat steady. They drove without speaking, tension thick enough to taste, the kind that meant everyone understood what this day meant. There was no going back. Not for him. Not for them. The first target was hiding in a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by men, barricades, weapons, the kind of setup cowards built when they knew execution was coming. The father didn't slow down. He didn't wait for backup. He stepped out of the car, walked straight toward the entrance, and when one of the guards raised a gun, he moved faster. A flash of movement, a crunch of bone, a choke of air, one man down. Another rushed him, and he threw him into the metal railing so hard the entire walkway shook. The alarm went up instantly. Shadows poured out from every corner of the warehouse. Gunshots cracked. Bodies rushed at him like a wave. He ducked, rolled, struck, never stopping, never hesitating. Every move was instinct sharpened by anger. He knocked the gun from one man's hand, slammed his head into a crate, used another's momentum to flip him to the ground with a crack that left him still. They kept coming. He kept going. His men arrived then, swarming the compound, turning the chaos into a battlefield. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He pushed deeper, through corridors painted with fear and desperation. He reached the office at the back of the warehouse, the core, the nest, the traitor's throne room. The man inside froze when the door shattered inward. He was older, bigger than the last time they'd faced each other, but fear had aged him more than years ever could. He raised his hands defensively, babbling excuses, sputtering accusations, blaming everyone but himself. The father didn't care. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed the man by the collar, and slammed him against the desk so hard the legs cracked. The traitor's eyes bulged. He begged. He promised. He cried. The father didn't say a word. He let silence judge him. Then he delivered punishment. By the time he walked out of the office, the warehouse was quiet, bodies groaning on the ground, his men standing at attention. He wiped blood off his knuckles, breathing hard, chest burning, but the fire inside him hadn't eased. Because this wasn't over. Not even close. The second name was next. They found him in a penthouse downtown, surrounded by luxury he didn't earn, protected by guards who didn't understand what kind of monster was coming for them. The father stormed the building with the force of a hurricane. His men shut down the elevators, sealed the exits, controlled the lobby. He ascended the stairs, 2 steps at a time, until he reached the top floor. He kicked open the door and walked through chaos like he owned it. The guards fired, but his men neutralized them with silent, efficient movements. The traitor cowered behind a marble counter, hands shaking, eyes wide with panic. He begged. He pleaded. He tried to run, but the father caught him with one hand, dragged him across the floor, and forced him to face him. He asked one question: why betray someone who once saved his life? The answer was weak. Money, fear, an opportunity. Pathetic. Consequences were inevitable. The father delivered justice with a coldness that sent shivers through everyone watching. When he was done, he wiped his blade clean with the man's designer suit and walked out without looking back. His men followed silently, respect and fear written in their eyes. One name left, one final spark feeding the fire. The third traitor wasn't hiding. He was waiting. A rooftop meeting. A message sent. A challenge made. The father accepted it without hesitation, standing on the edge of the tallest building in the city, wind whipping around him, rage coiled in his gut like a serpent. The man approached from the shadows, hands raised, smiling with a confidence he hadn't earned. He spoke like they were old friends, talked about the past, the glory days, the moments that shaped them. He tried to reason. He tried to negotiate. He tried to twist the truth, to make himself the victim, to claim he acted out of loyalty to something greater. The father listened. Then he took a step closer, eyes locked on the man's soul. He told him exactly what he thought of his excuses. Nothing. A father's duty didn't bend for politics. A father's love didn't crumble under threats. A father's rage didn't need permission. The traitor lunged first, a last desperate attempt to survive, but the father moved faster. They clashed, bodies slamming against the rooftop, fists flying, teeth gritting. They fought with years of history behind every strike. The man swung wildly. The father struck with precision. The man staggered. The father pressed harder. One final blow sent the traitor stumbling backward toward the ledge. He grabbed the railing, gasping, eyes wide with realization. The father stepped forward, heart pounding, the city lights reflecting off his skin like fire. He didn't push him. He didn't need to. The man slipped on his own fear. The city swallowed him whole. Silence settled around the father. Heavy. Final. The wind carried the weight of everything he had done tonight, everything he had destroyed, everything he had saved. For the first time in hours, he let himself breathe. He returned home as dawn broke, light spilling across his daughter's face as she slept peacefully. The maid sat beside her, eyes puffy from tears, relief washing through her when she saw him. She whispered, "Thank you," voice cracking with gratitude. He didn't speak. He just walked to his daughter, brushed her hair back gently, and let the warmth of her presence melt the last of his rage. For the first time, he understood something deeper than vengeance, deeper than fury, deeper than power. Family wasn't what made you strong. Family was what made you human. And tonight, he chose humanity over destruction, even if it cost him pieces of himself. Even if the city whispered about what he'd done for years to come. The war was over. Justice was served. His daughter was safe. And that was enough. In the end, a father's rage rewrote the fate of everyone who dared threaten what he loved most. The city bore the scars, the enemies fell, and the truth stood undefeated. When the dust settled, only one thing mattered. The girl who couldn't see him, but knew he would always protect her. When you stand for the innocent, strength becomes purpose. When you defend what matters, courage becomes instinct. And when family is threatened, even the quietest heart becomes a storm. Subscribe for more wild stories. Drop your comments, share this video everywhere, and tell us where you're watching from, because the next story will hit even harder.